ICF has endeavoured in a project in a partnership with the Government of Ethiopia. They're trying to modernise the system of tax administration with the Ethiopian Revenues and Customs Authority, or the ERCA. The project, which responds to demand from the private sector, marks the ICF's first project in Ethiopia and is set to bring significant benefits to the business community and to Ethiopia's wider economy. Omari Issa is the CEO of the Investment Climate Facility, or the ICF, and he joins us now. Thank you very much for coming through.
Thank you very much.
I know that you are involved heavily in East Africa, Tanzania being one of those countries, Ethiopia, which we're going to talk about. Just tell us about some of your initiatives.
Let me correct that a little bit. Our portfolio is more on the West Africa than it is in East Africa.
Right.
It's, I think, because we're based in Tanzania.
All right, just tell us about your
when we talk about these projects in this part of the country, they tend to, the continent, the tendency is to think that we're doing more projects on this side.
All right.
The project we have in Ethiopia responds to the demand from the private sector as well as the Government of Ethiopia to try and make it easier for people to file their tax returns. I think that's a good step moving forward if you want to encourage people to pay taxes. Imagine if you were to go to a shop and you had to queue for 3, 4, 5, 6 hours just before you got the product that you wanted. Now, the citizens, the taxpayers, have actually no choice. They can only pay their taxes through one body. And in the case of Ethiopia, it's ERCA. So what the project is aiming to do is to simplify the process, is to allow people to be able to file their tax returns online, so that they don't have to queue up at the offices of ERCA.
All right, let's talk about this e-filing system, because in South Africa it's working wonders. It's actually created a wider tax base and greater efficiencies, because as you're saying, you go online, you process one application, one payment mode, and you're done. Technically and technologically, is Ethiopia well prepared? Yes,
they have the skills in Ethiopia, but you have to think of the hurdles they have to go through. For example, this particular project will address only e-filing, will not address payment. Why will it not address e-payment? Because the current legislation does not allow for e-payment to be made. So as they implement this phase of the project, which is e-filing, legislation will be going through Parliament to allow the subsequent phase to address the issue of e-payment. Yes, if it is in fact easier to file taxes and to pay taxes, more people will respond. Exactly. And if you look at the small and medium enterprises, which really are the engines of growth for the continent going forward, they don't have all the resources, meaning, you know, hundreds of people who can go and queue up at centers to file taxes, and then to go again and join the queue to make the payments. If they can do it in the comfort of their offices, they can do it speedily, and they can see the benefits much more easily. The Ethiopian government, through this project, hopes that within the 2 years, at least 70% of the taxpayers will be able to file their returns.
All right. Now, the gestation of this period is 4 years for now, and targeting those who'd be interested in pursuing e-filing, which is about 25% of the tax base. You've still got 65%, many of them small and medium enterprises and people within business outside of the cities of Ethiopia who need to access some kind of tax payment and efficient tax submission system. What's being done about them?
Okay, first, the 25% of the taxpayers account for more than 60% of the taxes that are being collected in the country. So that is why the priority is there, you know, to enable those who make the most of the tax payment to actually go online much earlier than the others. Now, there are challenges with the small and medium enterprises. First, they need to have the facilities. You need to have the computer, you need to have the power supply, you need to have the skills. So as part of the project, there is in fact an awareness program, sort of educating the tax-paying public so that they would understand what needs to be done. if you look at the 25% of the taxpayers, they already have people who are familiar with that, so it's less of an issue. And when I was in Addis Ababa last month, we actually had a press conference, and we invited the private sector. It was just the beginning of explaining to the taxpayer the process going forward.
All right, now beyond tax issues are just general issues around modernizing government's interface with the public, services, other services that people need to access the state for. And the Ethiopian government has an agenda for institutional reform and modernization, as they call it. How would that enhance the work that you're trying to do within the Revenue Authority, and broadly speaking?
First, let me underline the fact that this project that we're doing in Ethiopia is not the first of its kind. We are helping Rwanda, we helped Lesotho 2 years ago, we're helping Senegal, and we're helping Tanzania, we're helping Zambia. So they have seen what can be done with very little investment over a very short period of time. You can actually get results. So the Ethiopian government, together with the private sector, identified this to be their -- 1 priority. The second priority for the private sector and the government in Ethiopia is actually customs administration. The third area is contract enforcement, judiciary, modernizing the judiciary. Ethiopia is more advanced than many other African countries, but they have seen what has been done in Rwanda, in Tanzania, in Zambia through support from ICF, and they are keen to do the same. So I believe in the next few months we will be entering into an agreement with the Ethiopian government for more support in the areas that I've just mentioned.
Let's get your perspective on the state of the Ethiopian economy, because it's one of those giants that nobody's really talking about in Africa. They're expecting growth somewhere in the region of 7 to 8% this year alone. They've been growing consistently at very high levels, even in the midst of the global recession. They've introduced innovations in agriculture. They've got a service-based industry which is now contributing significantly to GDP. And the question is, what are they doing right? That's the first one in Ethiopia, that other countries in the region could emulate, particularly agro-exporters. But secondly, what role is needed for the Ethiopian private sector to play more consistently, so that as we're talking about concretizing this growth, these SMEs you're talking about can be the drivers of growth as opposed to the state?
Yeah, I think the response I have as somebody who is working with the investment climate facility is that make the environment conducive. If you make the environment conducive, then the private sector will respond. Now, if you look at globally on the continent, the small and medium enterprises account for at best 10% of the economy. When you look at giants like Germany or the US, it's 60+%. How do we go from 10% to 60%? It's really accepting that the private sector has a role to play in the growth of these economies, and then making it easier for the private sector to operate. Now, until now, the majority of procedures, the majority of processes, the thinking within government circles is that the role of government is to control as opposed to facilitating. I think governments that are moving in the direction of facilitating the private sector, they are seeing returns much more quickly. They are seeing the growth rates that you're citing. It's not only Ethiopia, it's Rwanda, it's Burkina Faso, and I can go on. Make it easier, the private sector will respond, and that will create the jobs that will lead to economic growth.